All right. Now, historically, trans voice has been and will continue to be a topic considered taboo by many voice professionals who've been indoctrinated with outdated, dogmatic beliefs in the limitations of potential vocal versatility according to one's gender assigned at birth. Now, this can be seen in the choral classification of AMAB and AFAB individuals. AMAB being people who were assigned male at birth, AFAB being people who were assigned female at birth. For AFAB individuals, we see a choral classification of soprano, mezzo, alto. For AMAB individuals, we see the classification of bass, baritone, and tenor. Now, what modern scientific study of voice is starting to teach us is that it is entirely for anybody to sound like anybody else. Now, of course, as with any generalization, there are a couple exceptions to this rule. Okay? Now, before we can get into the nitty-gritty, we need to establish what the source and filter is. So, a source is sound created when the vocal folds phonate. The action of phonation creates a certain level of intraglottic pressure that changes depending upon the given vocal coordination. The second term we need to define is filter, which is essentially the vocal tract, or the distance from the larynx to the lips. Now, manipulation of the filter is how we change the tonal or timbral quality of sound created by the source, or the vocal folds. The shape of the filter determines the level of what's known as P-sup, or the abbreviation for supraglottic pressure. One of the fundamentals of being able to change the perceived gender of a voice is manipulating the shape of the vocal tract. In order to reach a more feminine sound, the y-axis of the vocal tract needs to be shortened. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that both AMAB and AFAB individuals will typically have different default lengths of vocal tracts just due to height differences in sex. Okay, but typically for an AMAB individual to reach a feminine sound, a couple factors need to be considered. All right, now here are the factors of the vocal tract that need to be considered for voice feminization. The first is narrowed oropharyngeal shape. The second is raised laryngeal position. The third is narrowed lip embouchure, or mouth shape. Fourth is forward tongue position. And the fifth is lowered velum. Now, the first factor is narrowed oropharyngeal shape. So the pharynx, as we know, kind of works like a nozzle in the throat where we can narrow the pharynx, which will increase the audibility of higher harmonics overlaying whatever fundamental frequency the vocal folds are producing.
Or we can widen the pharynx, which will decrease the audibility of those higher harmonics overlaying said fundamental pitch.
Now, the second vocal tract factor we have to consider is velum positioning. Now, oftentimes in classical pedagogy, we are taught that having the soft palate raised is necessary when it comes to balancing supraglottic pressure. However, when it comes to speaking in a female voice, this is actually not usually necessary, barring like yelling or, projecting where the raised position of the soft palate or velum can be warranted. However, for the most part, it's actually counterproductive to have the velum raised when trying to speak in a female voice. So in the picture on the left, we can see optimal positioning of the velum and oropharyngeal shape. And in the picture on the right, obviously we can see non-optimal positioning for the velum and oropharyngeal shape. All right. Now, the next timbral factor we need to discuss is laryngeal position. Okay, so just like pharyngeal shape, raising the larynx will create a smaller resonance space, which will help maximize the audibility of those more elusive higher harmonics. This is crucial when it comes to creating a feminine timbre. Now, we can actually observe the audibility of these higher harmonics via the use of a spectrograph. In one of the following slides, we will see a spectrograph illustrate the difference between the vowels A, E, O, U on the fundamental pitch of C4 through a male timbre and a female timbre. All right, so the next vocal tract parameter that we need to discuss is lip embouchure. Now, if you're like some of my colleagues and you don't appreciate this term when it comes to voice, and you know that that term is typically used when it comes to brass instruments and mouth shape, then we're just gonna generalize and call this narrow mouth shape, okay? Now, we all know that the vocal tract stretches from our larynx to our lips, so manipulating lower supraglottic factors such as narrowing oropharyngeal and laryngopharyngeal shape is not enough. This is where it's important to narrow the mouth to further maximize those higher harmonic overtones, right? Now, the last timbral factor we need to discuss is tongue positioning. So, in addition to the above listed vocal tract parameters, positioning of the tongue when speaking also has an effect on the audibility of these higher harmonic overtones. Okay, so when the tongue is brought forward, we create a smaller resonant space within our oral cavity, which again maximizes the audibility of those higher harmonic overtones. Caio? Now, we're looking at a snapshot of a spectrograph measuring the fundamental pitch of C4 navigating through the vowels A, E, O, U, on the left in a male timbre, and on the right in a female timbre. And Caio, you can explain and then I'll demonstrate. All right. Now, because we don't have a video, I'm just going to manually demonstrate the difference. Again, the fundamental pitch is the same, C4. But the tonal quality, the timbral quality, is so drastically different just by shaping the vocal tract to be smaller. Now, next, we need to discuss laryngeal vibratory mechanisms. So we have two main ones here that we're going to focus on. The first is laryngeal vibratory mechanism 1, or M1. Now, we can think of M1 as any coordination that requires the full body of the vocal folds to phonate. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to this rule. M2, on the other hand, is any coordination before a whistle that requires the edges of the vocal folds to phonate. Now, this LVM usually occurs after the passaggio in untrained singers. Again, there are exceptions to this definition because the more we develop our voice, the more so passaggio is a thing of the past. All right, now regarding laryngeal vibratory mechanism, this LVM is somewhat limited in its versatility as pitch is raised due to the higher level of volume that usually accompanies this coordination as range is increased. That being said, it is entirely possible to master vocalizing within this LVM at lower volumes with reduced power or density. Now, mechanism 2, right, it kind of has the same general rule of thumb where it's versatile, but it has its limitations. So one important thing to think about when it comes to mechanism 2 is that there is a way to make M2 sound very much like M1 with the correct timbral factors implemented, such as narrowed or a pharyngeal shape. In this next slide, we'll actually see a demonstration of each mechanism. The first one is M1, the second one is M2, the third one, you can define it yourselves. Call that whatever you may.
Good. Cool. Yeah, great. Cool. Yeah.
All right. All right. Now, the next topic we need to discuss is high open quotient vocalization versus high closed quotient. High open quotient is a quality of sound that is created during the process of phonation, where the vocal folds actually spend more time apart than they do together within a single oscillation cycle. This typically results in a more aspirate / breathy or feathery sound. Vocalizing with a high open quotient in laryngeal vibratory mechanism 1 is a way of brightening timbre / tone outside of the manipulation of the filter or the vocal tract. This is yet another timbral factor we need to be mindful of during the process of voice feminization. Next thing we should talk about is high closed quotient. Now, high closed quotient is during the process of phonation when the vocal folds actually spend more time together than they do apart within a single oscillation cycle of the vocal folds. This typically results in more vocal weight, so more power, more density. The next thing we should talk about is inflection. So one thing we have to keep in mind is that when we are speaking, a general rule of thumb is that M1 takes dominance over the two mechanisms for the most part. That means that barring high inflection points, M1 should be where the majority of your female voice takes place, okay? Now, that being said, the density or the power velocity of M1 needs to be taken into consideration as well. For instance, as with any mechanism, M1 is versatile when it comes to one's ability to vocalize within said mechanism relatively quietly. So you could have a right? All the same mechanism. Now, we should define what the BSA and BSP are. So the BSA is roughly a 3-note area within the frequency spectrum that the individual vocalizing spends the most time speaking within. In the case of one of my trans feminine identified students, the area could be B3, C4, and C#4 on piano. This is the area that the individual will most often return to after varying pitch to convey emotion. All right. Now, BSP is bass speaking pitch. This specific pitch is the one that is frequented most within the parameters of BSA. So if we stick with the same example BSA we used above, which was B3, C4, C#4, the BSP in this case would be C4, right? Oftentimes I find it is most often the second frequency within the BSA that turns out to be the BSP. Now, there are 3 major types of inflection. The first inflection is what's known as minor inflection. This is roughly a third away from the BSP, which in this case will be E4. So this inflection should still ideally occur within mechanism 1. All right. Now, the second type of inflection is what's known as a major inflection. This is oftentimes a perfect fifth away from the BSP, which in this case would be G4. My name is Zoe. All right. Now, this inflection can either occur with an M1 or M2, depending upon the emotion one is trying to convey. However, more often, this inflection will occur with an M2. Now, the last inflection that we need to talk about is an extreme inflection. This oftentimes usually takes place about an octave away from the BSP, which in this case would be a C5. My name is Zoe. Okay. One thing to keep in mind is that the potential to do this inflection with an M1 is also something to consider if you're really angry. Now, if you can combine all three of these inflections, it'll sound something like this. In order for your imagination to function positively, you need to sit quiet and still. All right, now, of course, that's a melodic demonstration of all the inflection points, but in normal speech, that would sound something more like this. In order for your imagination to function positively, you need to sit quiet and still. What we're seeing on screen is an abbreviated version of what we just talked about with inflection. Right, we have our BSP, base speaking pitch, and we can see we can either inflect upwards or downward. One thing to keep in mind is that inflection is not just always going up. Inflection could equally be going down really, really low in your voice to, convey maybe you're sad or, you're having a hard day or something. All right. Now, one last thing, this is a little bit of a bonus. The female voice doesn't always have to be super high. My voice in particular, I like it high, so it is high. However, you can also equally do, "Hello, the number you have dialed is no longer a working number. Please hang up or try again. Thank you. Goodbye." All right. Now, we should talk about the factors of the vocal tract for masculinization. Now, the first factor is
widened oropharyngeal shape. Okay, so once we do that, then we need to lower our larynx a little bit. Then we need to open our mouth, so wider mouth. Then we need to retract our tongue a bit, raise our velum, and decrease the pitch. And now we have a masculine sound.
Now, for exact details and demonstrations on this subject, y'all can check out my YouTube channel. If you search my name on YouTube, Zoe Alexandria, you will find plenty of videos about voice masculinization. I have 3 or 4 relatively detailed videos. The link to my channel is below. Right? Now, I have a clip from before and after from one of my students. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that up quickly. Give me 1 second. Here's before. This was done in 3 lessons, so keep that in mind. This is my student when they started out.
If I don't keep dropping in pitch.
This is after. 3 lessons, just 3.
I don't keep dropping in pitch.
So as far as lowering fundamental pitch, there are some limitations. However, as far as timbral capability is concerned, that's pretty flexible. Here's a student that was born female. They were taking, I think they took like 3 lessons with me. And this is after they finished their 3rd lesson. Let's try it again. Hello everyone. Before we can continue, we have a quick word from today's sponsor, which is the Ridge Wallet. Now, Ridge is a very compact, easy to use wallet that holds up to 12 cards. It's a very, very sturdy wallet, has a really nifty cash strap, and on top of it all, has RFID blocking technology. Now, with, the modern era and how everything's been going, digital pickpocketers are actually more of a common thing. So it's important to be able to protect your money, your information, and Ridge gives you a stylish and easy way to do that. Now, one thing I really, really love about the Ridge wallet is that it's just so compact. It's pretty. I look at the color scheme and there's so many different options. Now, the main thing, and this may seem kind of weird, but if you know me, then it's not that weird. But I drop stuff, I misplace it, that's just kind of who I am. So a lot of the time when I drop something, I may not hear it, and I may not realize, oh, I dropped something. This being the old wallet, let's hear what that sounds like when you drop it. Alright, you can hear it, but if you have headphones on, you may not hear it. Say you're out on the street, walking in the city, you drop the Ridge though, listen to this. Which one are you going to pick up first? Right, which one are you going to hear? That one. It's smaller, it's got better technology, it's compact, it's sturdy, it's pretty. Ridge wallet, everyone. If you'd like to pick up one of your own, you can head over to their website, which will be linked down below, using the code ZOE10.